My name is Natalie Brooks. I'm 27 years old. And for most of my life, I believed being the younger twin meant I had to fight twice as hard just to be seen half as much. I was the one who stayed up late studying, the one who picked up extra shifts, the one who saved every graduation card, every birthday check, every dollar I could hide away for the future. I learned early that if I wanted something stable, something safe, something that was truly mine, I would have to build it myself. But there was one thing I was told I would never have to fight for. The wedding fund. My parents always said it belonged to both of us. They talked about it like it was proof that Avery and I were loved equally. Like one day, when it was my turn to have a wedding, I would finally receive something that had my name on it, too. Then I found out the truth. Most of that money was already gone before I had a fiancé, before I picked a dress, before I even allowed myself to imagine what kind of wedding I wanted. It had been spent on my twin sister's perfect celebration. Ocean view. Luxury flowers. Matching bridesmaid robes. A professional photographer. A reception my mother showed off online like she had personally won some kind of parenting award. I tried to stay calm. I told myself money was just money. But the night my mother looked me straight in the face and demanded the little that was left, along with the savings I had built by myself, something inside me went completely quiet. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not beg them to choose me for once. I simply understood, finally and completely, that in that family, my future had always been negotiable. And when I refused, my mother said the words that ended whatever illusion I still had left. Before I tell you what she called me, and what happened after I packed my bags without shedding a single tear, tell me this. What time is it where you are right now? And where are you watching from? I always wonder how far stories like this can travel. Thanksgiving dinner that year looked exactly like the kind of family memory people pretend is warm. The turkey was a little dry. The mashed potatoes sat in a heavy white bowl in the middle of the table. Football murmured from the living room. Everyone smiled just enough to keep the picture from cracking. We were supposed to look like a normal family from Ohio, passing plates, making small talk, pretending gratitude was easier than honesty. I sat near the end of the table, the place I always ended up, listening to my mother praise my twin sister, Avery, as if getting married had made her the family's greatest achievement. Avery was 12 minutes older than me, and somehow those 12 minutes had become a lifetime of priority. She got the bigger bedroom when we were kids. She got the nicer birthday gifts. She got the expensive camps, more help with school, more patience, more second chances, and eventually, she got the wedding fund that I had been promised was for both of us. I said nothing during dinner. I had learned a long time ago that silence cost less than telling the truth in that house. After dessert, once the plates had been stacked and my father had settled into his recliner with one eye on the game, my mother called me into the kitchen. Her voice had that soft, careful tone she used whenever she had already decided what I was supposed to sacrifice. Avery followed us in, holding her phone like she expected some happy announcement. My mother leaned against the counter and told me Avery and Connor had been looking at houses. Not in the future. Not someday. Now. She said they had found a beautiful starter home in a good neighborhood, the kind of place that could help them begin their real adult life. I almost laughed. Apparently Avery's future needed a foundation. Mine had apparently been fine floating in the air. Then my mother said they were short on the down payment. Since there was still a little money left in the wedding fund, she said I should be mature enough to let Avery use it. I asked her if she meant the same wedding fund that was supposed to belong to both of us. Her face tightened immediately. She said Avery was already married, so Avery's needs were more urgent. I told her Avery's wedding had already taken most of that account. My mother corrected me like I had used the wrong tone in a business meeting. She said it had not been taken. It had been invested in family happiness. Then she said the part one had not expected, even from her. She told me my personal savings would help cover the rest. My savings. The money I had earned from part-time jobs, overtime shifts, graduation gifts I never spent, and the emergency fund I had built because deep down, I never trusted anyone in that house to protect me. I stared at her and asked if she was serious. Avery finally looked up from her phone and said it would only be a loan. But the way she said it made it clear she had already spent the money in her mind. My mother added that I did not have a husband, a mortgage, or real responsibilities yet. I told her I had responsibilities to myself. I said I was not giving Avery the last of the wedding fund. And I was absolutely not handing over the savings I had built with my own work. The kitchen went still. Even the sound from the television seemed to fade into the walls. My mother's face changed in a way I will never forget. She did not look disappointed. She looked insulted, as if I had stolen from her by refusing to let her steal from me. She stepped closer, pointed at me, and snapped, "You selfish little brat." Avery said nothing. My father did not come into the kitchen. Nobody defended me. Nobody said my name like I mattered. My mother told me that if I cared so much about my own money, then I could start caring about my own roof, too. She said I had until morning to leave. I looked at her, then at Avery, then around that kitchen where I had spent years cleaning up after people who never cleaned up the damage they caused inside me. And instead of crying, I smiled. Not because anything was funny. Because something inside me had finally locked into place. I said, "Okay. Just don't regret this later." My mother rolled her eyes like I was being dramatic. Avery gave this small laugh, like she believed I would apologize before sunrise. But I went upstairs, pulled my suitcase from the closet, and started packing the life they had never valued. By midnight, I had texted an old friend in Chicago, booked a morning bus ticket, and moved every dollar I had into an account only I could access. The last thing I packed was a framed photo from college. Not because I wanted the memory. Because I wanted proof that I had survived that house before I left it for good. I arrived in Chicago with 2 suitcases, a dying phone battery, and the kind of fear that almost feels like freedom when there is nothing left for anyone to take from you. My friend let me sleep on her couch in Lakeview for 3 weeks. During those 3 weeks, I moved like someone who knew she could not afford to fall apart. Every morning, I woke up before sunrise, put on the same black blazer, and applied to every corporate marketing job I could find. I rewrote my resume so many times I started dreaming in bullet points. I searched for apartments during lunch breaks, calculated train routes like survival math, and refused to think too long about the fact that my own mother had kicked me out over money she had no right to ask for. The interview that changed everything happened at a marketing firm downtown, inside one of those glass office buildings where everyone wore ID badges and moved like their calendars controlled their pulse. I had no family connection. No safety net. No mother making phone calls for me. I had my degree, my scholarship history, my work ethic, and the strange calm that comes from having already survived something worse than an interview. They hired me as a marketing analyst. The salary was not huge, but it was real. It came with health insurance, a 401k match, and the first feeling I ever had that my future could belong to me if I protected it carefully. My first apartment was so small I could vacuum the whole thing without unplugging the cord. But it was mine. The kitchen had old cabinets. The heater clicked at night. The view was mostly brick. But when I signed that lease, I cried in the empty living room because nobody could threaten to throw me out of it for saying no. I bought second-hand furniture, learned which grocery stores had the best prices, and slowly turned that tiny apartment into something I had never really known before. Not fancy. Safe. There is a difference. At work, I became the person who stayed late when a campaign needed fixing. The person who noticed numbers other people skipped over. The person who did not panic when executives asked hard questions. My manager noticed. Then her manager noticed. Within 14 months, I was promoted to brand strategy associate. The raise would not have looked dramatic to someone else, but to me, it was proof. Proof that I could build without begging. Proof that I could rise without being the chosen daughter. Proof that the girl they called selfish was somehow more responsible with money than all of them combined. I started contributing more to my 401k. Then I rebuilt my emergency fund. Then I opened a separate savings account for the wedding I still hoped to have one day. Not a Miami wedding. Not a performance. Not a stage for my mother's pride. Just something honest. Around that time, I met Julian Red at a coworker's birthday dinner. He was a software engineer, quiet in a steady way, and he did something my family had never done well. He listened. When I said I did not really talk to my family, he did not push for the whole story like gossip. He simply said, "Then I hope the people around you now are kinder to you." That sentence stayed with me longer than any compliment ever had. We became friends first. Then something softer. Then something serious. He did not try to rescue me, and I did not need rescuing. He simply respected the life I was building and stood beside it without trying to own it. Meanwhile, I heard almost nothing from Ohio. No apology. No concern. No message asking where I was living or whether I was safe. Sometimes I wondered if they expected me to crawl back. Sometimes I wondered if Avery got the house she wanted. But most days, I did not wonder at all. I was busy learning how to sleep without waiting for someone to insult me. Busy learning how peace felt. Busy becoming someone my mother could no longer use as a spare wallet, spare daughter, or spare future. For the first time in my life, my days were not arranged around being loved less than Avery. They were mine. And while I was building a life they could not touch, the perfect little world they had chosen over me was already starting to fall apart. I did not learn everything at once. Family disasters rarely arrive as one clean announcement. They leak through old friends, unfinished texts, awkward social media posts, and relatives who think they are whispering when they are really handing you an entire timeline. The first thing I heard was that Avery's dream marriage was not as perfect as the photos made it look. She had married Connor Hayes, a mortgage broker from Florida who loved expensive watches, waterfront restaurants, and telling people he worked in real estate even when the market was not kind to him. Avery had treated the wedding like her official promotion into a better life. Miami venue. Designer gown. Welcome dinner. Private photographer. Floral arch custom cocktails. Matching robes. Gift bags. Everything arranged to look like a sponsored event. My mother had treated every dollar spent as proof of Avery's worth. The problem was that after the wedding ended, Avery kept living like the reception was still going. Brunches, home decor, clothes, weekend flights, beauty appointments, credit card charges that looked harmless alone and terrifying together. Connor was not broke, but he was not the endless bank account Avery seemed to believe she had married. He liked the image of a polished wife. He did not like the bills that came with one. Their arguments started with spending, then turned into control. He wanted receipts. She wanted praise. He wanted limits. She wanted the fantasy to continue. Neither of them wanted reality. Back in Ohio, my parents were still pretending everything was fine. My mother talked about Avery like she had married into stability. She bragged about the wedding at church lunches and family gatherings. She said things like, "When your daughter chooses well, you invest in her happiness." I always found that funny, because nobody had ever invested in mine. Then my father had a health scare. It was not dramatic like a movie. It was chest pain, tests, specialists, follow-up appointments, medication, and bills that kept arriving in envelopes thick enough to change the mood of the room. His insurance was not as strong as my parents had assumed. The out-of-pocket costs were higher than expected, and the savings that should have protected them were mostly gone. The wedding fund had been drained for Avery. The remaining savings had been chipped away by honeymoon help, small transfers, credit card rescues, and all those quiet little payments parents make when they cannot admit their favorite child is financially reckless. My mother had built her identity around Avery being the successful daughter. So she kept covering for her. A little loan here. A check there. One emergency payment. One temporary rescue. But just this once becomes a lifestyle when nobody ever says no. Their house in the suburbs, the one my father used to call his best investment, suddenly became the only real asset left. They talked about refinancing, but the interest rates were not friendly and their debt picture was ugly. They talked about selling a car. They talked about asking relatives. What they did not talk about honestly was how they had ended up there. Nobody wanted to say the obvious sentence. They had spent the emergency fund on Avery's image and called it love. Avery's marriage kept getting worse. She had no serious career to fall back on because she had always been taught that being chosen was the same thing as being capable. Her little lifestyle page never made real money. The boutique job she once had was long gone. When Connor started pushing back harder, she ran to my mother. And my mother ran to the same accounts that were already empty. I heard that Avery cried about feeling trapped. I heard Connor accused her of marrying him for status. I heard my mother blamed stress, the economy, bad timing, anything except the years she had spent teaching Avery that consequences were for other people. Through all of it, nobody called me to apologize. Nobody called to explain. Nobody admitted that the wedding fund they had taken from my future had not saved Avery's. That was when I understood something I had needed years to learn. People who use you do not always come back because they feel guilty. Sometimes they only come back when the person they chose instead becomes too expensive. The call came on a Tuesday evening while I was making pasta in my Chicago apartment. I remember it clearly because the water was boiling, my laptop was open on the counter, and Julian had just texted asking if I wanted to visit a small wedding venue that weekend. My phone lit up with a number I had not seen in over a year. Ohio area code. My stomach knew before my brain did. I let it ring until it stopped. Then it rang again. Then a voicemail appeared. I did not play it right away. I stood there staring at my phone while steam rose from the pot. For a second, I was 22 again, waiting to find out which version of my family needed something from me. When I finally listened, my mother's voice sounded shaky, but not sorry. That was the first thing I noticed. She did not say she missed me. She did not ask if I was safe, happy, healthy, engaged, lonely, anything. She said there were things happening with my father's health. She said Avery was going through a very difficult time. She said the family needed to come together. Then she used the phrase that told me everything. You need to be a responsible daughter. Not loved daughter. Not wronged daughter. Responsible daughter. The next morning, I called back from a conference room at work because I did not want her voice inside my apartment. She answered on the first ring. For about 2 minutes, she almost sounded human. She told me my father's medical bills were becoming harder to manage. She said insurance was not covering enough. She said the house might have to be sold if they could not figure something out. I told her I was sorry he was sick. I meant that. I would not wish medical problems on anyone. But then she kept talking, and every sentence pulled the mask off a little more. Avery was separating from Connor. Avery needed money for a divorce attorney. Avery needed help finding somewhere to stay. Avery was emotionally fragile. Avery could not be expected to handle all of this alone. Then my mother said that since I was doing so well in Chicago, it would be selfish not to help. I asked her how she knew I was doing well. She paused. Apparently, someone had seen my LinkedIn update and told her about my promotion. I almost laughed. They could ignore my existence for over a year, but my salary was interesting enough to investigate. My mother said she was not asking for charity. She was asking for family support. I asked if she meant support like the wedding fund that had been promised to both of us before they spent it on Avery. Silence. Then she said that was different. I asked how. She said Avery's wedding was a once-in-a-lifetime moment. I said my future was supposed to be once in a lifetime, too. She sighed like I was being difficult and told me I had always kept score. That sentence hit something deep, but not in the way she wanted. I had not kept score. I had survived the score they kept against me. Avery texted me later that day. Long paragraphs. Dramatic lines. She said I had no idea what it felt like to have a marriage fall apart. She said I was lucky I got to run away and play independent in Chicago. She said family comes first and that one day I would regret turning my back on blood. Then she wrote, "You owe me more than you realize." I read that line 3 times. I owed her. The woman who had walked down the aisle wearing my future now believed I owed her lawyer money. That night, I pulled up old bank records my father had accidentally emailed me when I was still in college. I found the transfers. Venue deposit. Travel charges. Dress payment. Hotel block. Honeymoon gift. Smaller withdrawals after the wedding, all hidden behind vague family labels like help, support, temporary. I made a folder on my laptop and saved everything. Not because I wanted to sue them. Not because I had some loud revenge plan. I saved it because people like my mother love rewriting history, and I was done letting her edit mine. By the end of the week, my mother asked me to meet them in Ohio. She said we needed to talk face to face like adults. I agreed, but not because I was considering giving them money. I agreed because I wanted to look them in the eye when I finally said no. The coffee shop was 3 miles from the house where I grew up. I chose it on purpose. I did not want to step inside that house and let old walls make me feel small again. It was one of those local places with wooden tables, chalkboard menus, and college students pretending one latte could carry them through finals. I arrived early, ordered black coffee, and sat where I could see the door. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I expected anger. Maybe sadness. Maybe that old panic I used to feel when my mother got quiet right before she got cruel. But sitting there in my work coat, with my own money in my own bank account and a return ticket to Chicago already booked, I felt strangely calm. My mother came in first. She looked older than I remembered, but not softer. My father followed behind her, moving slowly, tired in a way that made me feel a brief pinch of sympathy. Avery came last, wearing sunglasses indoors like she wanted everyone to know she had been crying without letting anyone decide if the tears were real. They sat across from me like this was a negotiation and I was the difficult investor. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then my mother reached across the table like she had earned the right to touch my hand. I moved mine away before she could. Her face hardened. That was how quickly the warmth disappeared. She started by saying she hoped Chicago had not made me cold. I told her Chicago had made me responsible. She ignored that and said my father's bills were serious, Avery's divorce was becoming ugly, and the family was in a situation nobody had expected. I said I understood the situation. Avery took off her sunglasses and said, "Do you? Because it feels like you're enjoying this." I looked at her carefully. This was the sister my mother had chosen again and again. The sister whose wedding had swallowed my future and still left her unhappy. The sister who had never once asked how it felt when I was pushed out of my own family. I told her I was not enjoying anyone's pain. I was just no longer volunteering to pay for it. My mother's mouth tightened. She said that was a cruel thing to say with my father sitting right there. My father looked down at his coffee and said nothing. That silence used to break my heart. Now it only confirmed what I already knew. My mother started talking about sacrifice. Family sacrifices. Sister's sacrifice. Daughter's sacrifice. I asked her why sacrifice had only ever meant me losing something so Avery could have more. Avery snapped that I had always been jealous. I almost smiled, but I did not want to give her the satisfaction of thinking she had reached me. Instead, I opened my folder and placed printed pages on the table. Not dramatically. Not like a movie. Just one sheet after another. The Miami venue payment. The dress payment. The travel costs. The hotel rooms. The honeymoon gift. The withdrawals after the wedding. I watched my mother recognize them. Her eyes moved fast, then stopped. Avery glanced at the pages and looked away. I said, "This is what you spent from the fund you told me belonged to both of us." My mother whispered that weddings are expensive. I said, "So is starting over after your own mother throws you out." People at the next table went quiet. My mother noticed, and for once, she looked embarrassed. Not sorry. Embarrassed. There is a difference. She lowered her voice and told me not to make a scene. I told her she had made the scene years ago. I was just reading the receipt. Avery started crying then. Softly at first, then louder when nobody reacted quickly enough. She said Connor had controlled everything. She said she had nowhere stable to go. She said I had a good job, a good apartment, a good man, and I was punishing her for being loved. That was when I finally said the sentence I had carried all the way from Chicago. "No, Avery. I'm not punishing you for being loved. I'm refusing to keep paying for the way you were favored." My mother shook her head like I was breaking her heart. She said, "After everything we did for you." That almost made me laugh. I asked her to name one thing. One sacrifice she had made for me that she had not later turned into a debt. She opened her mouth, closed it, then said I was being disrespectful. I said, "You spent my wedding fund. You tried to take my savings. You called me a selfish brat. You threw me out on Thanksgiving weekend. And now you want me to come back as an emergency fund with a heartbeat." My father finally spoke. He said, "Natalie, we made mistakes." It was the first time anyone at that table came close to honesty. I looked at him and said, "Then you can live with the cost of them." My mother's eyes filled with anger. She said if I walked away now, I should not expect to have a family left. That threat would have destroyed me 5 years earlier. At that table, it sounded empty. I told her I had stopped having a family the night she made my place in it depend on my money. Then I stood up. Avery grabbed for my sleeve and said, "You owe me." I pulled my arm back and said, "I do not owe you my savings, my wedding, my peace, or one more year of my life." My mother said my name sharply, the way she used to when she expected me to freeze. I did not freeze. I picked up my coat, left enough cash for my coffee, and looked at all 3 of them one last time. "I stopped being your backup plan the night you threw me out." Then I walked out. No slammed door. No screaming. No shaking hands. Just cold Ohio air, my phone lighting up with messages I did not answer, and the cleanest silence I had ever heard. After that meeting, the truth did what truth usually does when people spend years burying it. It found air. I did not post about them. I did not send a dramatic family message. I did not need to. My mother did that herself. She called relatives trying to get ahead of the story, telling everyone I had become selfish, that Chicago had changed me, that I refused to help my sick father and abandoned Avery during the worst time of her life. But my mother had one problem. She could never complain quietly. The more she talked, the more details came out. Then one aunt asked a simple question in the family group chat. "Wait. What happened to the wedding fund?" That was the first loose thread. Another relative remembered my mother bragging about Avery's Miami wedding. Someone else mentioned the honeymoon. Someone asked if I had ever received my half. My mother tried to dodge it, but by then Avery was stressed, angry, and careless. She snapped back that everyone was acting like she had stolen something when our parents had offered. That was all it took. Suddenly, the story was not about me refusing to help. It was about my parents emptying a fund meant for 2 daughters and handing almost everything to one. For the first time in my life, people who had smiled through my mother's favoritism had to say it out loud. It was not normal. It was not fair. It was not family love. It was financial favoritism dressed up as tradition. Avery's divorce became final months later, and the perfect life she had posted online disappeared almost overnight. Connor had protected more of his assets than she expected, and the debts tied to her spending did not disappear just because the marriage did. She moved back to Ohio first, then stayed temporarily with a cousin when my parents' house became too tense. The lifestyle posts stopped. The smiling beach photos vanished. The captions about blessings and dream homes were replaced by silence. My father's bills kept coming. The house that had once been used as proof that my parents had done everything right went on the market. They did not lose it in one dramatic moment. They sold it because they had to. Medical costs, debt, bad refinancing options, and years of treating Avery's wants like emergencies finally caught up with them. My mother cried when the sale sign went up. I heard that from a relative I had not blocked yet. She said my mother kept saying she never thought things would end this way. I believed that. People like my mother rarely imagine consequences reaching their own front porch. They imagine consequences as something other people carry. I blocked the last few relatives after that because every update felt like someone trying to hand me a bill written in guilt instead of dollars. I did not attend the house closing. I did not visit Avery. I did not send money. I did not send a speech either. My silence was not revenge for the sake of cruelty. It was protection. There is a kind of peace you only find when you stop explaining your boundaries to people committed to crossing them. A year later, I married Julian in Chicago. It was small, warm, and completely paid for by us. No ocean view. No designer performance. No mother turning the aisle into a stage for her pride. Just a small venue with brick walls, white flowers, close friends, good food, and vows that made me feel steady instead of displayed. I walked down the aisle knowing every dollar behind that day had been earned honestly. I thought I might feel sad that my family was not there. Instead, I felt clear. That surprised me more than anything. I had spent so many years believing family was something you had to keep even when it hurt you. But that is not love. Love does not ask you to destroy your future to prove loyalty. Love does not call you selfish for protecting what you earned. Love does not spend your dreams on someone else and then demand your savings when the applause runs out. What I learned is simple, but it took me years to believe it. Boundaries are not revenge. Self-respect is not cruelty. Financial responsibility is not selfishness. And walking away from people who only value you when they need you can be the most important lesson of your life. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is not ruining anyone else's life. It is refusing to let them ruin yours. So tell me in the comments. If your own family used guilt to take from you, would you forgive them, help them, or choose your peace and walk away?